The hoodie and the iron gate. It was 6:02 a.m. when the city was still rubbing the sleep from its eyes. Fog crawled low across the sidewalks, wrapping downtown in a cold embrace, as if trying to protect it from what was coming. A lone black SUV rolled slowly to a stop outside the towering entrance of Vanguard Dynamics, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the nation. The building rose like a monument to modern ambition: polished steel, reflective glass, and arrogance in architecture form. Inside the vehicle, Donovan Steele, mid-40s, sat sipping from a tall paper cup. His face was stoic, framed by a salt and pepper beard and sharp brown eyes that had seen the best and worst of humanity. He wore a plain black hoodie and dark jeans. Nothing about him screamed power, and that was exactly the point. No chauffeur, no designer suit, just a man, his thoughts, and a mission. He glanced at the mirror. They won't recognize me. That's the point. A week ago, he had received an anonymous message from an employee within Vanguard. Mr. Steele, I don't know if you're aware, but the racism in this company is alive and well. If you look like me, they treat you like you don't belong. Like you're a threat. The company had only been under his ownership for 3 months, a recent acquisition through his private equity firm, Steele Legacy Group. On paper, he was just a majority shareholder. But today, he wasn't interested in papers. Donovan stepped out of the SUV, steam from his coffee curling into the cold air. He adjusted his hoodie, tucked his hands in his pockets, and walked toward the gleaming double doors. He wanted to see it himself. He needed to. Inside the massive lobby, everything gleamed like wealth. Polished marble floors, towering white columns, an intricate chandelier hanging like a crown over the main entrance. The place was built to impress. Except Donovan wasn't impressed. He observed the employees as they breezed through security. Mostly white, well-dressed, confident. They didn't even glance at the security desk, just flashed badges and got waves or smiles. But the moment Donovan's boots stepped onto the marble, the air changed. Conversations trailed off. Jokes died in midair. 2 security guards, both white men in navy blue uniforms, stood taller. One of them, broad-shouldered with a shaved head, nudged his partner and pointed. That was Carson Mallory, head of the building's security team. His partner, a leaner man with thinning hair and sunken eyes, was Doug Price. Both men moved as if they'd done this before, like it was routine to intercept certain kinds of people at the door. Donovan kept walking. Hey. Carson's voice cut across the marble, firm and loud. Where you going, sir? Donovan stopped 3 steps from the security desk. His expression didn't change. Upstairs, he replied calmly. I have business with the executive team. Doug tilted his head. You got a delivery or something? That's through the service elevator, around back. No delivery. Donovan smiled lightly. Just a meeting. Carson narrowed his eyes, already scanning Donovan's hoodie and jeans like they were crimes. Name: Donovan. And last name. He paused. Steele. Carson's brow twitched. You kidding me? No. Carson gave a scoff and looked at Doug. Right. Donovan Steele. Like the Donovan Steele. Doug gave a low whistle. You know he's a billionaire, right? He chuckled. Sure. And I'm Bill Gates. Carson took a step forward, hand hovering near his radio. All right, funny guy. Let's cut the act. You need to wait outside. This lobby's not open to the public until 8 a.m. I'm not the public. Donovan's voice dropped a register. Calm. Controlled. Dangerous. Then you can wait here until someone verifies who you are. Carson's eyes narrowed further, now flickering with annoyance. You don't just stroll in like you own the place. Donovan held his stare. But I do own the place. For a moment, silence reigned. Then Carson laughed. Loud. Mean. Man, get the hell out of here with that nonsense. You want me to call the cops? Without breaking eye contact, Donovan raised his coffee cup to his lips and took a long, slow sip. Doug stepped in now. "You're causing a disruption. Last warning." Donovan's voice was silk wrapped around steel. "Touch me, and you'll regret it." But Carson wasn't listening. He grabbed Donovan by the arm, not violently, but firmly, and started to push him toward the doors. And that's when the glass elevator at the far side of the lobby dinged. Vanessa Holloway, Donovan's longtime assistant, stepped out, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. She froze mid-step as she saw what was happening. "Oh me," she gasped. "Qui let him go." The two security guards turned. Vanessa was already storming across the lobby. Carson frowned. "Ma'am, this man is trespassing." "He's not trespassing, you idiot," she snapped. "He's the CEO. He's the owner. He's the reason this building has heat." Carson's face drained of color. Donovan calmly pulled his arm away, brushing the spot where Carson had touched him like it was dirt. He looked over at Vanessa and smiled faintly. Right on time. Vanessa whipped out her tablet and started firing off emails. "I want both their badges, security footage pulled, and HR brief before 7 a.m. Doug backed away, face pale. Carson still looked like he was processing it all. "Wait. No way. That guy owns Vanguard." Vanessa turned to him, voice low but venomous. "And you just manhandled him. You're finished." A handful of employees had stopped to watch. Whispers swirled like wildfire. Phones hovered half-raised. The once silent lobby became electric. Donovan walked past the stunned security guards like they were statues, his boots quiet against the marble, yet somehow thunderous. He didn't need to yell. He didn't need to threaten. But just before stepping into the executive elevator, he paused, turned around slowly, and locked eyes with Carson. "You just lost your job," Donovan said simply, "and anyone else who thinks like you." He scanned the growing crowd. "You've got 2 minutes to decide what kind of company you want to work for." The elevator doors slid closed. Upstairs, chaos was about to begin. The boardroom earthquake. The top floor of Vanguard Dynamics was a world apart from the rest of the building. Here, the carpet was thick and silenced footsteps. The ceilings were high, lined with soft white lighting that gave everything a false sense of calm. Frosted glass offices sat like fishbowls around the perimeter, each holding an executive deep in emails, meetings, or manipulation. Donovan Steele walked through this space with quiet, deliberate steps. Vanessa trailed just behind him, her heels clicking a rhythm of purpose and precision. "Legal is already pulling their files," she said, glancing at her tablet. "Carson has 6 complaints against him from Black and Latino employees, all buried." "And Doug?" Donovan asked, not even looking back. 3 written warnings, 2 verbal, ignored. The previous administration was either complicit or scared. Donovan stopped in front of a thick, double-glass door. The silver lettering read, "EXECUTIV ISTORATGUE Boardroom." He pushed it open without knocking. The conversation inside came to a jarring halt. 7 board members, all white, mostly male, sat at the long obsidian conference table. Expensive watches glinted in the morning sun. Suits pressed to perfection. Their faces went from curiosity to confusion to thinly veiled contempt. "Can we help you?" asked Walter Remington, the CFO. His gray hair and measured voice carried the weight of a man who had survived 4 CEOs. Donovan stepped inside. Vanessa entered behind him and closed the door. "No need," Donovan replied, calm. "I'm here to help you." Walter blinked. "And you are?" Vanessa stepped forward, her voice clipped and cold. "Gentlemen, allow me to introduce you to Donovan Steele, CEO of Steele Legacy Group. As of this quarter, sole owner of Vanguard Dynamics." The silence was instant. One of the executives, Janice Croft, tried to recover first. "Oh, Mr. Steele," she said with a tight smile. "You caught us off guard. We were told you'd be touring the manufacturing wing this morning. That was the plan, Donovan said evenly, until your security team grabbed me and threatened to call the police. Dead silence. Donovan walked slowly around the table, his hand dragging across the glossy surface. It's amazing what people show you when they think you're nobody. Walter shifted uncomfortably, unsure this is all just a misunderstanding. It wasn't. Vanessa snapped. We have video. Audio. Eyewitnesses. Your head of security profiled the CEO and physically restrained him for not belonging in his own company. Another executive, George Tillman, cleared his throat. Mr. Steele, I can assure you we take discrimination very seriously. Do you? Donovan's voice was suddenly sharp, because from where I stood, it looked like business as usual. George closed his mouth. Donovan's eyes swept the table, studying them. Each board member shrank a little under his stare. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His very presence, black, confident, unapologetic, challenged everything they thought leadership should look like. Let me be very clear, Donovan continued. You may not have liked the sale. You may not like me, but I'm not here for your approval. He reached into the inner pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a slim silver USB stick, laying it on the table. This contains every complaint filed by employees of color over the past 5 years. Not one of them made it past HR. He paused. Not one. Janice glanced at her peers. I wasn't aware of any of this. Exactly, Vanessa said. That's the problem. Donovan stepped back, folding his arms. You have 48 hours. Each of you will submit a full report of your department's practices. I want names, promotions, terminations. I want the numbers broken down by gender and race. If I find even one falsified report. His voice didn't rise. It dropped. You'll be escorted out the way Carson just was. The tension in the room could slice steel. Walter leaned forward. With all due respect, Mr. Steele. Donovan smiled. Careful, Walter. That phrase is usually followed by disrespect. Walter flinched. Then the door opened. A young black woman, early 30s, poked her head in. Mr. Steele, sorry to interrupt. Marcus Reed is waiting for you in the reception area. Vanessa nodded and whispered. The guard from the report. Donovan's expression shifted slightly. Bring him in. 15 minutes earlier, Marcus Reed stood nervously at the 40th floor reception desk. His uniform was neat, his back straight, but anxiety rolled off him in waves. He had seen Carson and Doug being escorted out. That was rare. Security usually got demoted, not removed in handcuffs. When Vanessa herself called him and said, Mr. Steele wants to speak with you, he'd nearly dropped his phone. Now he watched the glass conference room from a distance. Through the frosted edges, he could see the silhouettes of people standing, gesturing, arguing. What could the CEO want with a mid-level security guard? The receptionist smiled kindly. You can go in now. Back in the boardroom. The room was silent as Marcus entered. He paused just inside the door, unsure if he should sit or stand. Vanessa offered a reassuring nod. Donovan turned to him, his expression unreadable. You filed 6 complaints over 3 years about discriminatory behavior by your fellow guards, correct? Marcus nodded. Yes, sir. All ignored. Yes, sir. You ever consider quitting? Marcus hesitated. Every day. Then why didn't you? Marcus took a breath. Because someone had to stay. Someone had to be here in case something worse happened. Donovan's eyes locked with his. Even when the system failed you. Marcus nodded again. Especially then. The room was still. The executives watched, unsure what this was building to. Then Donovan turned to Vanessa. I want his promotion paperwork ready by noon. A few gasps. Effective immediately, Marcus Reed is now Director of Security for Vanguard Dynamics. Marcus's jaw dropped. Sir, I don't even. You already earned it. You just needed someone to stop holding the door shut. He walked over and held out his hand. Marcus, stunned, reached out and shook it. And in that handshake, something passed between them. Two black men in a place not built for them. One who had clawed his way to the top, one still rising. Walter stood up abruptly. With respect, Mr. Steele, shouldn't we run background checks, verify his management? Donovan turned sharply. If we're vetting people now, Walter, maybe we should start with you. Walter sat down. Later that day, word of what happened spread like wildfire. The CEO was black. Security was fired. A guard was promoted. HR was under review. It was as if the glass and steel walls of the company had cracked, and sunlight poured into rooms long kept dark. In the break room, employees of color whispered in cautious hope. In hidden group chats, some execs plotted damage control. And in his new office, Marcus sat behind a real desk for the first time in his life. A nameplate gleamed. Mark U.S. Reed, Director of Security. He stared at it for a long time, then picked up his phone and called his 12-year-old daughter. "Baby," he said, choking on his words. "Daddy got promoted today." The quiet storm. The sun was low in the sky, casting a golden glow across Vanguard Dynamics. Inside, however, the mood was anything but warm. The air in the building had changed in a way that couldn't be ignored. It wasn't just the new leadership. It wasn't just the sudden firings of the old guard. Something bigger was stirring under the surface. Something Donovan Steele had set in motion the moment he stepped into this world. In his office, Marcus Reed sat at his new desk, the weight of the title still sinking in. Director of Security. The title didn't feel real. The room around him felt too pristine, too sterile for someone who had lived a life of shifting shadows and overlooked reports. But here he was, sitting behind a desk, not in a dingy cubicle or the back of the security room. It wasn't just the title that had changed. It was his whole reality. His phone buzzed with a message from Vanessa. "Get ready. This is just the beginning." It was a reminder of what was at stake. Vanguard Dynamics was far from being cleansed of the toxins that had permeated every level of the company. This was the first step, but the real work, the hard work, was yet to come. And Marcus had to lead it. That night, it was 8 p.m. when Marcus finally left the building. The elevator doors shut softly, sealing him off from the hustle inside the building. He let out a long breath as the elevator descended, feeling the weight of the day on his shoulders. He stepped outside into the cool evening air, his mind racing. He needed to clear his head. Maybe the walk would help. The city stretched out before him, its lights twinkling like stars in the darkened sky. The world felt still, yet beneath that stillness, there was an undercurrent of tension. He had seen the looks in the hallways. People unsure of him, skeptical of his rise. Some avoided his gaze, but others watched him like a hawk, their eyes sharp with judgment. But the worst part, it was the whispers. They were everywhere. He clenched his jaw, fists balled at his sides. Marcus wasn't just fighting to keep his job. He was fighting for the chance to change a system that had broken him, had broken so many others before him. He thought of Elijah, his son. The dream of a better life, a better future for him, kept Marcus moving. As he crossed the street, his phone rang. It was Vanessa. "Marcus," she said quickly, her voice tight. "We've got a problem." Marcus stopped walking. "What happened?" "There's a smear campaign starting. Anonymous complaints, internal memos suggesting that you're not fit for your new role. It's all being funneled through HR." Marcus' heart sank. How did they get to HR so fast? "Same way they always do," Vanessa replied. "Old habits die hard. You need to be prepared. They're going to try to discredit you." The next day, inside the boardroom. The next morning, the boardroom at Vanguard Dynamics was more crowded than usual. There was a buzz in the air as senior executives from all corners of the company took their seats. Some had barely said a word since Donovan's arrival, but now, The meeting had a different air. Donovan was sitting at the head of the table. His fingers drummed slowly on the surface, the sound steady, deliberate. It wasn't a nervous habit. It was a reminder to himself that he was in control. The room fell silent when Marcus walked in. It was no secret that he had a new role. It was no secret that some of the older executives, those who had been at Vanguard for years, weren't thrilled about it. But now, something far more dangerous was happening. The board was realizing that the structure they had known was crumbling beneath them. Donovan nodded toward Marcus. "Sit down, Marcus. You're one of us now." Marcus didn't just sit. He took his place at the table, across from Donovan. His eyes scanned the faces around him, executives who had ridden high on a system of privilege. Now those same faces looked uncertain. "Today," Donovan began, his voice low but commanding, "we're going to start talking about what real change looks like at Vanguard. This isn't a discussion about profits. Not today. Today, we talk about values." The words hit hard. Donovan turned to Marcus, giving him the floor. Marcus stood, his hands on the table. He had seen the look in the eyes of the board members, the skeptics, the survivors of the old regime. "Vanguard," he began, his voice steady, "has been a company built on exclusion. For too long, people like me have been forced to the margins. The people who should have been heard were silenced." The room shifted uncomfortably. "Today, that changes," Marcus continued. "I'm here to make sure that every person, every single person, has a chance to speak up, to be heard." His words hung in the air, hanging like a challenge. But Marcus wasn't finished. He could feel the tension in the room, the undercurrent of resistance from those who feared losing control. "Starting next month," Marcus said, "there will be mandatory diversity and inclusion workshops. Every department, every manager, every board member. We'll start with the leadership team and work our way down." There were murmurs of disbelief. One executive, Henry Whitmore, the VP of Operations, leaned back in his chair with a smug look. "That sounds a bit extreme, don't you think?" Donovan didn't miss a beat. "No, not extreme. Necessary." Marcus nodded in agreement. "It's about time we tear down these walls. It's about time we stop pretending that the old ways work." The first hit. But even as Marcus laid down his vision for the company, outside the boardroom, the storm was brewing. The rumors started the moment Marcus left the room. Henry Whitmore had a long reach. He had built an empire of influence, a shadow network that was not easily undone. From the moment Marcus had taken his seat at the table, whispers began circulating in the hallways. Anonymous complaints about Marcus's leadership style, about his qualifications. The same playbook they had used against him before was being applied now. It didn't take long before the first formal report made its way to Vanessa's desk. She had been expecting it, but it still stung. The complaint wasn't about Marcus's performance. It was about his leadership potential and his unconventional rise to power. She fired off an email to Donovan. "They're starting it. The campaign's begun." The quiet breakthrough. That afternoon, Marcus sat at his new desk, working through his daily security reports, when he received an unexpected knock. It was George Tillman, the COO, standing in the doorway. A rare visitor. "Can I talk to you for a second, Marcus?" Marcus looked up. "Of course. Come in." George stepped inside. I need to apologize," he said, his voice quieter than Marcus expected. "I didn't realize how bad it was. The culture here. I thought I was just doing my job, making the company profitable." Marcus studied him. "You didn't think about how we got there." George shifted. "I didn't, but what you said in that meeting, it hit me hard. I've seen people like you just disappear. Every time we said it was just business. But it wasn't. It was prejudice." Marcus didn't know how to respond. He had heard this kind of apology before, but there was something different about this moment. George wasn't trying to save face. He was being honest. "You're not off the hook, Marcus said. But you're not the enemy. At least, not anymore. But you can help, if you really want to change. George nodded. I'm all in. What can I do? Marcus gave him a small, appreciative smile. Start by ensuring the rest of the executives understand what's at stake, and keep your ears open. We need allies, not lip service. The gathering storm. Later that evening, after the board meeting, Donovan stood alone in his office, looking out over the city. It had only been a few days since his quiet intervention in the lobby, yet the ripple effects were already becoming apparent. He knew that this was just the beginning. The battle was coming, and he was ready for it. The shifting tides. The days following Marcus Reed's promotion felt like a strange balance between victory and impending conflict. Vanguard dynamics had begun to ripple with the effects of change, but not all the ripples were peaceful. As Donovan Steele had predicted, there were those who fought to keep things the way they were, those who would stop at nothing to protect the status quo, even if it meant taking drastic steps. In his office, Marcus sat at his desk late into the evening, staring at the piles of paperwork in front of him. He had no time to relax. He had no time to celebrate. His work had just begun. Every file he opened told a story of employees who had been pushed aside, overlooked, or silenced. It was hard to look at it all without feeling the weight of every injustice. He had spent years fighting for recognition, for respect, for change. Now he was being asked to rewrite an entire company culture, a task that felt nearly impossible. But he had to do it, for Elijah, for everyone who had ever felt small, for the many voices that had never been heard. Donovan's right, he muttered under his breath. I'm the one who has to lead this change. As he scrolled through another report, his phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Vanessa. We have a situation. The board is pushing back hard. Henry's pulling strings. Be prepared. Marcus felt his stomach twist. He had expected resistance, but he didn't expect it to be this coordinated, this early. He picked up the phone and called Vanessa. What's going on? Vanessa's voice came through, low and tense. I've got eyes inside HR. They're rallying the old guard. They've already planted more complaints about you in the system. It's subtle, but it's there. Is it just Henry? Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. No, there are others. Some senior executives who feel threatened. They're using the same tactics as before, undermining you, questioning your competence, trying to make you look unqualified. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He had anticipated this. No, he had counted on it. But that didn't make it any easier. The very executives who had enabled the toxic culture at Vanguard were now fighting tooth and nail to preserve their power. I'll take care of it, he said, his voice firm. The quiet meeting. The next morning, Marcus stood at the entrance of the boardroom. He had spent the night preparing. He knew what had to be done. The time for quiet diplomacy was over. It was time to expose the cracks in the company's foundation and let the truth break through. He entered the room to find a half-empty table. The usual power players were present. Henry Whitmore, the VP of Operations, and Sylvia Hartwell, the head of HR. They looked up as he walked in, their expressions guarded. A few of the other executives were absent. Marcus knew why. Good morning, he said coolly, his voice calm but filled with authority. Marcus, Henry said with a thin smile. I trust everything is going well in your new role. It's going fine, Marcus replied, taking his seat. But we need to talk. Henry's eyes flickered for a moment, his lips tightening. About what? Marcus slid a stack of documents onto the table. About this, he said, his voice steady. About the smear campaign you've been running behind the scenes. About the complaints you've planted to discredit me. The false reports you've submitted to HR. And about the way you've been trying to sabotage me. The room fell silent. Sylvia's eyes darted to the papers, her face paling as she realized the trap had been set. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the coordinated effort to take me down, Marcus said, his gaze never leaving Henry. You think I don't know what's going on? You think I haven't seen the subtle moves? You're using the same tactics that have kept this company in the dark for so long. Henry's composure faltered for a second before he recovered. This is a serious accusation, Marcus. Are you saying? I'm saying, Marcus interrupted, that I've been through enough in this company to recognize when someone's playing games, and I'm not playing anymore. If you want to continue this, you'll do it with your name on the line. Sylvia's voice trembled. We've followed proper channels. No, you haven't, Marcus shot back. You've used your position to bury complaints, to manipulate situations, to push out anyone who doesn't fit the mold you've created. And now you're trying to do the same with me. Henry opened his mouth to protest, but Marcus held up a hand, cutting him off. I've got all the evidence I need, he said, his voice calm and deadly serious. Emails, reports, video footage. It's all there. The question is, how long do you think you can keep it hidden? There was a long, tense silence as the room processed what Marcus had just said. Finally, Henry broke the silence. You think you can just waltz in here and change everything? This company was built by people like me. We've made Vanguard what it is. And that's exactly the problem, Marcus replied. You built it by excluding people like me. People who actually know how to lead. He stood up slowly. I'm giving you a choice. You can step aside gracefully, or you can be exposed for the frauds you are. Either way, your time is up. The threat that looms. As Marcus walked out of the room, he could feel the weight of their stares on his back. He wasn't afraid of them. He wasn't afraid of the backlash or the lies they would spread. He was done playing nice. He wasn't going to wait for their approval anymore. If they wanted to fight dirty, so be it. He had learned how to fight back. That afternoon, as he walked through the halls of Vanguard, he felt a sense of calm settle over him. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't confidence either. It was certainty. He was doing the right thing. And he wasn't alone. The plan begins. That night, Donovan Steele was back in his office, looking over the same documents Marcus had seen earlier. He was reviewing the same reports, the same names, the same faces. But now Donovan wasn't just an outsider watching from the sidelines. He was part of the team. He was part of the fight. Vanessa entered quietly, her tablet in hand. She had the look of someone who had been working nonstop, piecing together the puzzle. The new hires in security are all set, she said. We've got the full surveillance package. The real one. Donovan nodded. Good. The next step is crucial. We need to make sure everyone knows what's really going on here. The truth needs to come to light. Vanessa raised an eyebrow. You're going public. Not yet, Donovan replied. But the pressure needs to be applied. We'll make sure that Marcus has every tool he needs to push them into a corner. Once they're cornered, we expose them for what they are. Vanessa smiled, her eyes sharp with determination. I'll take care of it. The turn of the tide. The next morning, Marcus stood outside the CEO's office. He wasn't sure what had brought him here, but he knew he couldn't wait any longer. His next step wasn't about talking. It was about action. As the doors opened, he stepped inside. Donovan was there, as usual, looking over a stack of files. When he saw Marcus, he straightened, ready for the next round. Marcus smiled faintly. Let's bring the fight to them. The breaking point. The atmosphere at Vanguard Dynamics had changed overnight. The whispered rumors that had once swirled through the building like invisible smoke were now becoming more audible, more insistent. And they weren't just about Marcus anymore. They were about the entire shift in power, a shift that Donovan Steele had quietly set into motion. Marcus sat in his new office, which, though spacious and well-appointed, felt cold and unfamiliar. His security team had already started gathering evidence, small, seemingly insignificant things that had once gone unnoticed by the previous leadership. He had walked into a war zone, but this wasn't just about him or his promotion. This was about something much larger. This was about the foundation of the company itself. He had to expose the rot, root it out, and rebuild it from the ground up. Today, however, was different. Today, Marcus was set to make his first real move against the old guard, the ones who had tried to bury him and his vision for a better vanguard. The final blow. It started like any other day, with Marcus walking through the familiar halls of the building, glancing at his reflection in the glass walls. But today there was something heavier in the air. The faces he passed no longer looked away when they saw him. Instead, there was a mix of curiosity, fear, and even respect in their eyes. The changes were happening. As he reached the executive floor, the tension was palpable. The meeting he had scheduled with Henry Whitmore, the VP of Operations, was about to begin. Marcus had requested a private meeting, and Henry had reluctantly agreed. But Marcus knew this was no ordinary meeting. It was the turning point, the moment when everything that had been simmering beneath the surface would boil over. When he entered the boardroom, Henry was already there, sitting at the head of the table. His usually impeccable posture was slightly slouched, his hands clasped together tightly, betraying his anxiety. "Marcus," Henry said coolly, his voice edged with disdain, "I assume you've come to discuss my department's latest performance review." Marcus stood at the table's edge, leaning against it casually. "Not exactly," he replied, his voice calm but firm. "I'm here to talk about something far more important." Henry raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but unwilling to show it. "I'm listening." Marcus met his gaze, his eyes sharp. "We both know what's been happening behind the scenes, Henry. The complaints, the sabotage, the way you've been using your position to discredit me and undermine my leadership." Henry's face stiffened, but he didn't speak. He knew this conversation was coming, but he hadn't anticipated the direct approach. "You think I don't know what you've been up to," Marcus continued. "You've been planting false reports in HR. You've been whispering in the ears of your allies in the company, trying to paint me as unqualified." Henry's lips curled into a tight smile. "And what are you going to do about it? You're a director now, Marcus. You can't just throw people out without cause." "I don't need cause," Marcus replied, his voice cold. "I have enough proof to expose you for what you are." The silence that followed was suffocating. Henry's eyes flickered, his composure cracking just for a moment. He knew Marcus wasn't bluffing. "You're making a mistake," Henry warned, his tone darkening. "You have no idea what you're up against." "I know exactly what I'm up against," Marcus shot back. "And I'm not backing down." Henry stood up abruptly, slamming his hand on the table in frustration. "You think you can just waltz in here and change everything? You think you can tear down everything I've built?" Marcus stood his ground, his stance unwavering. "No, Henry. I'm not here to tear anything down. I'm here to rebuild it. But I can't do that if people like you are still holding the strings." For a moment, it looked like Henry might lash out. But then, as if something inside him clicked, he stepped back, his face darkening with a mixture of anger and fear. "Fine," Henry spat. "If you think you can make a difference, go ahead. But remember this. When the dust settles, you'll have no one left to back you up. You'll be alone." "I've been alone before," Marcus said quietly, his voice laced with determination. "But this time, I'm not fighting for myself." With that, Marcus turned and walked out of the room, leaving Henry standing in the midst of his own unraveling empire. The web unravels. Marcus returned to his office, his heart pounding. But there was no time to rest. This was only the beginning. The battle was escalating, and he could feel it in his bones. The email had already been sent to HR, official notification that Henry Whitmore was under investigation for his role in orchestrating the smear campaign. The game was in motion, and there was no turning back. Later that day, Vanessa came into his office, her face tight with concern. "They've called an emergency meeting," she said, her voice low. "The board is making their move." Marcus's stomach twisted. He knew what this meant. They were going to try to undermine everything he had worked for, everything Donovan had worked for. They had already played their hand. Now they were desperate to regain control. "Donovan's in the meeting already," Vanessa added. "He's ready to back you up. But we need to be strategic. This isn't just about HR or complaints. They're going to come after you personally." Marcus nodded. "Then it's time to expose them all." The showdown. The emergency board meeting was unlike any other. The room was filled with tension, with a few nervous whispers exchanged between the board members as they settled into their seats. Henry Whitmore was at the table, but his usual air of control had cracked. He looked weary, as if the walls he had built around himself were beginning to crumble. Donovan Steele stood at the front of the room, his presence commanding attention. He wasn't here to play games. This wasn't just a corporate meeting. It was a battlefield. "Let's get to the point," Donovan said, his voice firm. "This company is changing, whether you like it or not." The room went silent. "This company," Donovan continued, "has been built on exclusion, racism, and manipulation. The old ways have to go, and if you're not ready to change, you need to leave." There was a sharp intake of breath as the board members exchanged uneasy glances. "Now," Donovan said, "Marcus Reed has been doing the work of a leader. He's exposed the rot in this company. He's taking steps to make sure this place becomes a better, more inclusive environment. And if any of you think you're going to stop him, think again." Henry slammed his fist on the table, unable to keep his anger in check any longer. "You can't just throw us out, Donovan. You don't understand how things work here. We built this company from the ground up. You built it on lies," Donovan shot back. "On the backs of people who were never given a chance. On the backs of people like Marcus." At that, Henry's face turned beet red. "And who are you to lecture me? You're just a businessman who bought us out." "I'm not just a businessman, Henry," Donovan interjected. "I'm the man who's cleaning up your mess, and Marcus is the one who's going to lead that charge." The final stand. The tension in the room was suffocating. Every eye was on Marcus now. For a moment, the old guard looked like they might take the fight to him. But Marcus stood tall, his expression unwavering. "You think I don't know what you've been doing behind the scenes? The complaints, the smear campaign," Marcus said, his voice steady. "I have the proof. I've seen the emails, the false reports, the underhanded tactics." Henry stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous. You think anyone here believes you? You're an outsider. You don't understand how things work at Vanguard." Marcus looked directly at him, his voice low and dangerous. "I understand perfectly. You built a system that rewards greed and punishes honesty. But that's over now. I'm taking over, and if you want to fight me on this, I'm ready." The room was still for a long moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, Henry grabbed his papers and stormed out of the room. The others followed him, one by one, all of them knowing that the battle for Vanguard was over. And Marcus Reed had won. The reckoning. The city outside Vanguard dynamics had never felt so alive. The streets buzzed with the pulse of a world oblivious to the tectonic shifts happening inside the company's walls. To the public, the glossy facade of the building was unchanged. But inside, everything was different. The tension that had once clung to the hallways like a shadow was now replaced with an air of anticipation, even excitement. The employees who had been silently observing from the sidelines now stood taller, more confident. Some still whispered, unsure of what would come next, while others openly celebrated the changes that had begun. The foundation had cracked, and the future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. As Marcus Reed sat behind his new desk in the Director of Security office, the weight of the last few weeks settled over him. His journey had not been an easy one. He had fought not just for the job, but for the soul of the company he now led. And in the process, he had earned something far more valuable than a title. He had earned the right to change everything. But even as he sat there, A quiet storm was brewing just beneath the surface. The storm gathers. Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from Vanessa. The old guard is trying to fight back. They're not done yet. We've got a target on our backs. Marcus's jaw tightened. He had expected as much. The battle wasn't over. This was just the calm before the storm. The old guard, those who had thrived under the previous CEO, weren't about to go down without a fight. They would fight. They would scheme. And they would try to tear down everything Marcus had worked to build. But Marcus had learned something over the past few days. He wasn't afraid anymore. He was done being silent, done waiting for permission. And he was going to make sure that every person who had ever been overlooked, discriminated against, or ignored had a chance to speak up. It was time to take the fight to them. The first blow. That afternoon, the executive floor was eerily quiet. Marcus could feel the pressure mounting, the weight of the decisions he'd made sitting heavily on his shoulders. He knew that any mistake now would undo everything. The spotlight was on him, and everyone in the building knew it. A soft knock on his office door interrupted his thoughts. He looked up to see Vanessa, her face tight with concern. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "They've started. The smear campaign is in full force," she said, her voice low. "Emails, anonymous complaints, rumors, it's all happening. It's a coordinated attack." Marcus exhaled slowly. "I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I didn't think they'd come for me this hard." Vanessa's eyes flickered with determination. "They're scared, Marcus. You're shaking their empire to the core. They won't let go of their power without a fight." Marcus stood up, his gaze hardening. "Let them fight. I'm not backing down. They've tried to silence me. They've tried to undermine everything I've worked for. But I'm not some punching bag they can throw around." Vanessa nodded, her voice resolute. "I'll make sure everything's documented. The evidence is stacking up." "I don't need the evidence," Marcus replied, his tone firm. "I need action. I need them to know that we won't be intimidated." The internal war. Meanwhile, down the hall in the HR department, the storm was raging. Sylvia Hartwell, the HR director who had been complicit in the old regime's tactics, paced nervously around her office. The power she had once wielded, controlling the careers of countless employees, was slipping through her fingers. She had seen the writing on the wall when Donovan Steele and Marcus Reed had walked into the building, and now she was fighting to keep her grip on what little power she had left. Her phone buzzed with a new email. She opened it and quickly scanned the contents. It was a forwarded message. Anonymous complaints, all targeting Marcus. Complaints about his leadership, about his lack of experience, about his rise to power. It was everything they had been preparing for. And it was time to push forward with the narrative they had carefully crafted. But just as she prepared to send the email out to her contacts, the door to her office opened. "Sylvia," said Henry Whitmore, his voice low and dangerous. He had been conspicuously absent from the board meeting that morning, but now he stood in her doorway, his face twisted in anger. "You're not going to get away with this." Sylvia glanced up at him, her face pale. "I'm doing what needs to be done. We can't let Marcus take control. We can't let him change everything." Henry stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You don't get it, do you? It's not just about Marcus. It's about everything we've built here. We're not going to let some outsider come in and ruin this company. Not without a fight." Sylvia swallowed, her throat dry. "What do you want me to do?" Henry's eyes gleamed. "You need to accelerate the smear campaign. We need to make sure that Marcus's so-called leadership is discredited before it gains any real traction." Sylvia nodded, a sense of unease creeping over her. She had been part of the system for so long, part of the machine that rewarded people like Henry. But now, as she looked into his eyes, she realized that he was desperate, desperate enough to take the company down with him if it meant keeping his power. The turnaround. Back in Marcus's office, the situation was escalating. He could feel the weight of it all. The whispers, The subtle attacks, the way the very people who had once cheered for his rise were now looking at him with doubt. They were trying to break him, trying to make him question his leadership. But Marcus wasn't having it. He called a meeting with his new leadership team. The room was filled with fresh faces, people who had joined the company under his watch, people who were committed to the vision of a more inclusive, transparent vanguard. They sat around the conference table, their eyes focused on him. "Today," Marcus began, "we fight back." The room was silent, the anticipation palpable. Everyone knew what was at stake. "We're not just here to protect ourselves," Marcus continued. "We're here to protect the people who've been silenced. The people who've been told they didn't matter. The people who were ignored by the system we've inherited. We're going to expose the rot, and we're going to rebuild this company the right way." Vanessa stood beside him, her expression fierce. "We've got all the evidence we need. We've got their emails, their false reports, their attempts to tear Marcus down. It's time to show them that we're not afraid anymore." Marcus nodded, a steely resolve in his eyes. "We'll take this to the board. But we won't just expose them. We'll make sure that every employee who's been overlooked has a chance to rise. We're not just changing Vanguard, we're changing the entire industry." The final battle. The meeting with the board was set for the next day. Marcus knew this would be the final test. The old guard was going to make their last stand, but Marcus was ready to face them head-on. As he walked into the boardroom the following morning, he could feel the weight of the moment. This was it, the final battle. The boardroom was filled with familiar faces, but today they looked different. Their eyes were narrowed, their bodies tense. They knew what was coming. They knew that the system they had fought so hard to protect was crumbling. Henry Whitmore stood at the head of the table, but he looked defeated. Sylvia Hartwell stood beside him, her expression cold. "Marcus," Henry began, his voice lacking its usual authority, "you've been a problem from the start." Marcus didn't flinch. "I'm not the problem, Henry. You are. You and the people like you who've been running this company into the ground." The silence in the room was deafening. Every eye was on Marcus, waiting for him to make his move. "We've gathered the evidence," Marcus said, his voice unwavering. "You've been undermining my leadership, spreading lies, and trying to sabotage everything I've worked for. And it's not just me you've been targeting. You've been targeting the people who've been silenced for years." He turned to the rest of the board, his gaze sharp. "You can either stand with us, or you can leave. But make no mistake, we're taking Vanguard to a place it's never been before." With that, he dropped the bombshell. He handed over a stack of documents, evidence of the old guard's wrongdoing, their schemes, their lies. "This ends today," Marcus said. "The reckoning." One by one, the old executives were escorted out. Henry Whitmore was the first to go, his face ashen, his jaw clenched with rage. Sylvia Hartwell followed, her eyes wide with disbelief. The rest of the board members, those who had backed the old regime, didn't protest. They knew their time was up. As the doors to the boardroom closed behind them, Marcus sat at the head of the table. It was over. They had won. Vanguard Dynamics was his now. But the real work was just beginning.